This video is about the coconut oil fake news that appeared in the mainstream media on June 16th, 2017. Here is one of the news pieces that was sent around, quite popular. You can see down below all the activity on Facebook, and then we don't see how many tweets were given, but this appeared on Twitter. Lots of people on the bottom here, you can see lots of people commenting. Many are freaking out about this. The title, "Coconut Oil Isn't Healthy. It's Never Been Healthy." Pretty strong language. Such strong language requires some equally strong support, and you'll see shortly that this is nothing more than more food propaganda continuing into the current time period, which has been going on now, as you can see from the bottom video I did about a month ago. For over 100 years now, the food propaganda continues. So, where has coconut oil been consumed as a staple? And is it associated with heart disease expression in those populations? Because, according to that very strong statement you saw a moment ago, the answer should be yes. Well, let's see. I'm going to give you a screenshot from a paper. Let's look at it. Furthermore, a recent meta-analysis does not support the notion that saturated fatty acids, which is why coconut oil is condemned, saturated fatty acids do not increase the risk of coronary heart disease, stroke, or cardiovascular disease. And if you replace saturated fatty acids with high glycemic index carbohydrates, this has actually been found to significantly increase the risk of heart attack in a recent study with 53,664 women and men. Now, to answer the above questions, also there are populations such as the horticulturalists of Catawba. They are down in the Solomon Sea and part of New Guinea, as well as the Pacific Islanders in Tokelau, if that's how you say it, with very high saturated fatty acid intake from coconut, up to 45% of total energy in the case of Tokelau, and apparently low coronary heart disease rates. So this clearly goes against that ridiculous statement that you saw from USA Today. Now, where did this come from? Let's say that this was how you chose to battle the argument that is being put forth now. Lots of people have done videos and wrote articles, and they pretty much do battle like this, and I'll show you why. There's a better way to do it, in my opinion. So this came from this paper here, The Western Diet and Lifestyle and Diseases of Civilization, lead author, Pedro Cardiovascular. You go down to the bottom, who do you see? Loren Cordain. Now, Loren Cordain, you all should know, if you're interested in the paleo diet, Loren Cordain is the founder of the paleo diet, a very misunderstood approach because of all the people who have come along afterward and capitalized on the term paleo without really understanding the science as Cordain does. So one might argue, well, of course he would say saturated fatty acids are fine, but in fact, his original book back in 2002 was not positive on saturated fatty acids. The emerging research has shown that it is in fact sugar, flour, i.e. your high glycemic index carbohydrates that are the problem. They create in the body creates saturated fatty acids from refined carbohydrates, and that is the real culprit. Now, Stefan Lindeberg, he is the man behind the Catawba study, which I've discussed previously, and Cardiovascular was Lindeberg's last PhD student. Stefan Lindeberg passed away soon. So if one wanted to, they could say, well, and because people are anti-meat, anti-saturated fat, militant type vegans, and they will argue that this is not an appropriate reference. So That's fine. Let's get another one. This is from Nutrition Reviews 2016. And you can see coconut oil consumption and cardiovascular risk factors in humans. We'll go right to the middle, and you can see what they say there. Observational evidence suggests, this would be the example of the Catawba study by Lindeberg, operational as well as the Tokelau residents in the Pacific Islanders. Observational evidence suggests that consumption of coconut flesh or squeezed coconut in the context of, very important, the context of traditional dietary patterns does not lead to adverse cardiovascular outcomes. So that is why, so they're basically telling us, or confirming what the paleo diet researchers, Cardiovascular, O'Keefe, Lindeberg, and Cordain just said. They are confirming what the paleo researchers have talked about. However, due to the large differences in dietary patterns, dietary and lifestyle patterns, these findings cannot be applied to a typical Western diet. That is true. That is true. And we need to think about this in the context of the whole anti-coconut oil movement. So overall, the weight of evidence from interventional studies. Intervention studies to date suggest that replacing coconut oil with unsaturated fatty acids would, this would be more, in this case, I forget if polyunsaturated fats is omega-6, omega-3s, would alter lipid profiles in a matter with risk factor reduction. So that does not tell you that coconut oil has never been healthy. So very inappropriate. And we'll see how to look at this in a couple seconds. So what they just told us, large differences in Western populations. So let's take a look right here. The cover back in front of my book. Here is the average American's diet. This would be the type of calories, the family of vegetation consumed by the Catawbans and the Pacific Islanders. So you add coconut oil here, no problem. You add coconut oil here. Now, why would anybody think that they could add coconut oil to a diet rich in pizza, French fries, cupcakes, cookies, ice cream, chips, muffins, deep fried chicken, and bread, and somehow that would make one healthy? That is delusional thinking. Now, in all likelihood, the average person in America who is, or wherever you're listening, the average person in the modern day is not rushing out to do coconut oil. The people who tend to do coconut oil are the people who tend to be eating healthy already. So the context of coconut oil consumption in America are by those who are pursuing health, more so than the average person over here. I mean, really, why would they care? But if we apply coconut oil to this diet, you should expect it not to be healthy. I mean, it's ridiculous. People overeat sugar, flour, and refined oils. Now we add coconut oil, and it's going to help. I mean, how humorous, really. Let's look at what the average American consumes. This came from the USDA Dietary Guidelines for Americans 2010. They tell us, and on the far right side, this is adult ages 19 and older. Average intake is 2,200 calories. What are we eating? Grain-based desserts, bread. Oh, look at this. Bread and desserts. Very similar to the recommendation from 1990. Remember, simple suppers are best. Feed your children bread, cookies, and milk. That's what Americans are eating. They're still following the 1919 recommendations for bread, cookies, and does milk show up here? Not quite the same. So here's chicken mixed dishes, soda, alcohol, pizza, tortillas, pasta, beef, dairy desserts, burgers. And when I say burgers, right, what does burgers mean exactly? Because burgers could be a piece of meat. It could mean meat with cheese. Or it could mean meat, cheese with bread and everything else that goes along with it, including mayo and ketchup. So this is not really helping us that much, at least right here, superficially. Regular cheese, chips, Frank's sausage, So basically Americans eat sugar, flour, refined oils, and meat as their primary calories. And what takes the blame? Remember, sugar, flour, and refined oils, if you read the DeFlame diet book, represent about 56.6, 57% calories. I just rounded up to 60 to remind us. It's easier. So almost 60% of our calories comes from sugar, flour, refined oils, and then we throw some meat on top of it, and they blame the meat. Here are some nuts and seeds. Here are your French fries. What else do we eat? Ready-to-eat cereals, candy, eggs. They take the hit also. Rice mixed dishes. Here's your milk. So now in the top 25, the first two, of course, are cookies, bread, and then down below, number 21 is milk, to be consistent with Americans following the 1919 recommendations of simple suppers. Quick breads, there's some more bread, fish, fruit drinks, and salad dressing. Notice, what are they putting the salad dressing on these people? I mean, on top of candy? Let's put some salad dressing on top of our fruit drinks. You see, Americans eat virtually no calories from vegetation. So the answer to America's dietary problems is not whole grains and beans. It is more vegetation, just like you see on the cover of the DeFlame diet book. So when we look at this type of eating pattern, we are going to put on weight. So this is a free paper if you wish to get it. Adiposopathy. This is basically refers to sick fat. In this freely downloadable paper, Dr. Bays gives us this picture of Big Daddy on the couch. Now notice what they show as being like, there's the burger and the cheese, right? This is what they show. But remember, 60% of the average American consumes largely sugar, flour, refined oils. That's where they get most of their calories from, and way less from meat and cheese. So meat and cheese and bacon, unless bacon or ketchup, probably ketchup, which is basically sugar. So this is sort of disingenuous, this picture, but this is what people think. If you're not a plant-based diet person or a vegan, all you're doing is this. See, the plant-based diet and vegan people have a difficult time conceptualizing that you can have some meat and then piles of vegetation on top of it, which would technically make that diet plant-based as well. So what we do in America is we end up eating ourselves into this bloated, inflamed, body fat, adiposopathy rich state, and then we're going to give this person coconut oil. I mean, it just defies logic. So when this does happen, and when this person does transform into this bloated, inflamed state, they are going to have a cholesterol problem. The problem is that the cholesterol problem that we hear about is always just about LDL cholesterol, never about how lipid metabolism is inextricably linked to carbohydrate metabolism. And the real issue with LDL is, of course, when it becomes oxidized, and not just when you have, the LDL level itself. It must be taken into consideration with its oxidation and the other lipid and glucose sugar markers. So with that in mind, let's look at the paper that USA Today claim about coconut oil came from. This is the paper. And so this is the section. In the paper, you can see it's right here, coconut oil. I highlight in yellow coconut. This is the extent, one big, long-winded paragraph. You would think that people who are decent writers would break up the information into readable paragraphs, which is one big, long-winded paragraph. And this is the extent. It doesn't even make one column in the paper, and yet the anti-coconut oil maniacs went ballistic. So let's look at the key quotes more carefully. So this is where they went crazy on this, based upon that one, not even, maybe almost 3/4 of a column. So a recent survey reported that 72% of the American public rated coconut oil as a healthy food compared to 37% of nutritionists. Well, of course, the nutritionists are grain washed and saturated fat washed forever and ever and ever and ever. So we're not going to worry about that reference. What we're going to do here is look at the references that were used in this article to see if this claim is justified. And the answer you'll see, it's so obviously no. So if we look a little more carefully, you can see reference 95. I'll go over each one of these individually. Reference 96 and reference, reference 97. So 97, 96, 95. Three references and not even a column led to this ballistic anti-coconut oil news blast. So let's look one by one. Reference 95, 6, and 7. Here they are. You can pause and read them if you want. Probably you're not going to worry about that. Doctors, you probably should. Others, not a big deal. But let's look at this. So what I've done here is I've broken down the quote from each article. So you can see here, 95, a carefully controlled experiment compared the effects of coconut oil, butter, and safflower oil, supplying polyunsaturated linoleic acid, which would be your olive oil. So both butter and coconut raised LDL compared with safflower. Butter was worse than coconut, as predicted by the meta-regression analysis of individual dietary saturated fatty acids, which looks interesting from a statistical research perspective, but what about real clinical relevant information? So what you have to do to see if this is legit or not is actually get the paper. Now, fortunately for us and bad for them, these three papers, referenced 95, 6, and 7, are available. So let's look. You can see the title here, Effects of Coconut Butter and Safflower on Lipids, published Journal Lipid Research back in 1995. Look how long ago they have to go. Now, perhaps you're doing this to show we've known this for a long time, but let's see what they actually know. Here's the paper. Here's the paper. So what does this paper tell us? So we're going to read through here, this up top part of the abstract. Let's look at it. So the physiologic effects of coconut oil, butter, and safflower oil lipids have been compared. And who are they? Moderately hypercholesterolemic individuals. Now, two things here. Moderately hypercholesterolemic. So these people, when I read this, I anticipate to see elevated glucose if they measured it. I anticipate to see elevated triglycerides. So if you have someone who has elevated triglycerides and elevated glucose, which means they're already overeating, why would you just give them coconut oil? It doesn't even make any sense. It's foolishness. But making it worse, though, is that there were a total of only 28 people in this study. 28 people in this study. So 3 papers quoted in this one paper, and then the anti-coconut oil blitzkrieg occurs moments later, which is insane. So here is the subjects, what they looked like on entry into the study. So what does that mean? Well, let's look at, and by the way, they made a mistake here, so it should have been 13. They put 3 here by mistake. N means the number. So 13 males, 15 females. Now the problem with this for the average American is that we do not look at glucose and lipids in the context of millimoles per liter. So we have to change these into milligrams per deciliter. So I'm going to do that. We're just going to look at the males, largely because males, generally speaking, have the biggest problem with the whole hypercholesterolemia issue. So you can go to a website and you can do conversions. So you can see here total cholesterol, HDL, LDL, triglycerides. You enter the number and you look for millimole per liter to milligram per deciliter, calculate, and you get the change. Okay, so here's what we do. Remember, we're looking at the men, and we see here fasting glucose, 5.3 millimoles. It's 96 is the average. Now you want to be below 100. when you get close to 100, it means you got a blood sugar problem. So you can see the range here, 84, which is great, up to 106, which is full-on metabolic syndrome. So once you hit 100, that's metabolic syndrome. So we don't know how many because they didn't tell us each one, but probably half the people in this group had metabolic syndrome. So why would you give someone who has metabolic syndrome coconut oil, expect some? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. You don't treat metabolic syndrome with coconut oil. So this whole thinking is irrational. Basically, what this is thinking about fats as if they're medications, and that's not how you're supposed to look at nutrition. That doesn't make any sense. So total cholesterol average was 250. HDL cholesterol average was 46. So you want to be above 40. You can see our range here, 38.6 to 54. LDL cholesterol average was 166. You can see the range, 143 to 189. Here's the biggie though, triglycerides. Average triglycerides was 203. Range was 115 to 287. Now, what we're supposed to have, fasting triglycerides should be no more than 90. If it's above 90, it means that there is a problem with postprandial fat production. So anyone who is above 90 is flaming. Once you get above 150, you have a marker for metabolic syndrome. So here we are looking at a population of patients, half of whom probably have metabolic syndrome. And so all they're doing is throwing around fatty acids as if that's going to make some big difference. And it should make no difference, really. I mean, it's absolutely, frankly, absurd. So let's look at what they tell us in this study. Remember, let's look at the conclusion, because the conclusion is key. So in summary, our data provide convincing evidence that coconut oil rich in lauric acid has a lesser effect than butter on total and LDL cholesterol in hypercholesterolemic men. These findings suggest that in certain circumstances, coconut oil might be a useful alternative to butter and hydrogenated vegetable fats. Well, how interesting is that? It might be useful alternative. That sounds different than the USA Today statement that it has never been healthy ever, right? Should never use it ever. According to one of the papers that the American Heart Association published paper says it might be a useful alternative to butter and trans fats. However, it should be noted that in individuals and populations with a tendency to obesity, all fat sources should be restricted, and that depending upon the requirements of individuals, fats high in stearic acid or monosaturates may be preferable to coconut oil. Well, they really don't know for sure. If you have low-calorie diets, in general, it doesn't really make any difference. But you can see how different this summary is compared to the misleading information made in that article from USA Today. So, strike one against the USA Today blitzkrieg about coconut oil. Here comes strike two. This is reference number 96 in the American Heart Association article. Another carefully controlled experiment from the coconut oil significantly increased LDL compared with olive oil. Now remember, LDL, nothing is mentioned about small, dense, oxidized LDL, sorry for the trouble printing, but whatever, small SD, small, dense, oxidized LDL, which is the atherogenic form of LDL. Shame on the American Heart Association for not differentiating between LDL and small, dense, oxidized LDL, which is the atherogenic marker, which you can learn a whole lot more about in my previous 2 cholesterol videos that I showed you earlier. I'll show you them again in a little while. So this is the citation. You can see American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, 2012. Let's see what the actual paper says, because this American Heart Association published paper makes it seem like the paper was all about looking at LDL. See the title of the paper, and here's the title of the paper. Diets high in palmitic acid, lauric myristic acids, and oleic acid Now, palmitic acid will be more in butter, lauric acid is going to be more in coconut oil, and oleic acid will be more in olive oil. So butter, coconut, olive oil in general. Who are these people? Now look at the title of the paper though. These different fatty acids, so butter, coconut oil, olive oil, do not alter postprandial after eating or fasting blood levels of homocysteine or inflammatory markers. Well, look at that. No mention of LDL. Isn't that incredible? Isn't that just amazing? Not a single mention of LDL. So let's look at what they did here. The design, a randomized crossover intervention with 3 dietary sequences of 5 weeks each. 3 dietary sequences of 5 weeks each, conducted on 45 healthy subjects. Healthy, non-metabolic syndrome, non-hypercholesterolemic. So you would expect there to be no significant change whatsoever from a clinical perspective, not a numerical perspective, which people looking for an angle will often exploit. So let's see what happened. So we're incorporating into 2/3 of the 30% of fat calories into this high-protein Malaysian diet. Let's look at the results. Results! No significant differences were observed in the effects of the 3 diets on homocysteine or inflammatory markers, TNF, IL-1, IL-6, IL-8, C-reactive protein, interferon gamma. Hey, where's this LDL thing that the coconut oil paper supposedly, or the American Heart Association paper related to the coconut oil? It doesn't even show up here. It was so not even an issue in this article. Imagine how you got to scrape the bottom of the barrel to go for a paper, cite it out of just 3, scare the nation about coconut oil, and the second paper doesn't even mention LDL in the results. What does the conclusion say? Diets that were rich in saturated fatty acids prepared with either palm oil or coconut oil, and an olive oil diet that was high in oleic acid did not alter postprandial or fasting plasma concentrations of homocysteine and selected inflammatory markers. Well, there you go. Where's the LDL issue that we just saw a few moments ago? You can see how sort of, from my perspective, a bit despicable when I see this. So let's go to what we're shown in Table 3. They did show us cholesterol levels. So Table 3, looking at lipid profiles in the 3 dietary interventions. So this was the beginning, this was looking at your people after coconut oil. So we're going to compare coconut oil to olive oil. Now again, what we have to do here is go to our calculator where we can convert millimoles into milligrams per deciliter. And by the way, if this thing is tiring you a little bit because maybe some complicated words, just pause and come back later. But this is how you analyze a paper that has been used by some really bad reporting people to trash an oil that's pretty innocent. So we take total cholesterol and we convert it into so here is after coconut oil, 191. HDL was 52. LDL was 127. Now, what we also want to do is look at triglycerides. So we're going to do it right now, line them all up. The coconut oil period of time afterwards, 191, 52, 127, and 79. Most of you, whether you're a doctor or a patient, would really like these numbers. I mean, these are pretty good. Maybe higher HDL, but the 79 triglycerides tells you that you got good lipemic and most likely glycemic control. So let's compare the olive oil group, or this group when they did olive oil, because it's the same group, just changing the diet 3 times. So look what happens. So 191 compared to 179. HDL was lower, higher with coconut oil. LDL was slightly lower with olive oil, and this is what they based that quote on in the American Heart Association article that prompted the coconut oil is evil. This is it. 9 9 milligrams per deciliter difference. And that is supposedly evidence that coconut oil was never good for you and never will be, never healthy, whatever else that stupid quote was. And here is triglycerides. So you can see from a practical perspective clinically, there is no difference in this population when they're consuming coconut oil or olive oil. Shame, shame, shame on the American Heart Association and the incompetent people who read and reported upon it. So let's go to reference number 97. A recent systemic review found 7 controlled trials, including the 2 just mentioned, which you see have, of course, no bearing on the topic of coconut oil being bad, just misrepresented. So these 7 controlled trials compared coconut with mono unsaturated or poly. So this would be like olive oil is rich in mono, safflower, sunflower, corn rich in polys. Coconut oil raised LDL in all 7 of these trials, significantly in 6 of them. What we just saw, really, this is significant? This is a cardiovascular effect? There's no evidence that this has any effect on cardiovascular disease or is even remotely related to someone's overall health. 127 versus 118 is ridiculous. So the authors also noted that the 7 trials did not find a difference in raising LDL between coconut oils and others such as butter, beef fat, or palm oil. So here we are again, going after your tropical oils, butter, and meat. They love to go after these guys for some reason. It just makes, well, I guess it makes good sense if you think about, the business of all this, because this is big business. It's not about health. So let's look at this paper. You may remember this paper. I cited this paper earlier as a supporter. Remember? This paper that supposedly implicates coconut oil as being terrible was where I was supportive of the paleo guys. You can rewind and listen to it. This is what they said, remember? You have to rewind because here it is. Observational evidence. Remember the Catawbans and the Pacific Islanders that consume coconut or squeezed coconut in the context of traditional dietary patterns, not the French fry, flaming diet, cupcake diet, pizza diet of the average American, when consumed in this context, does not lead to adverse cardiovascular outcomes. And so, note what the American Heart Association paper does say, to their credit, which of course is not mentioned in the big coconut scare in the mainstream media. This is the end of that quote. Clinical trials that compare direct effects on cardiovascular disease of coconut oil and other dietary oils have not been reported. In other words, imagine this. There has been not a single study looking at the actual disease promoting, like if we give you coconut oil, what's your chance of having a heart attack? Never been studied, ever. Ever. However, and here's where they come in, however, because coconut oil increases LDL cholesterol, and we saw meaninglessly in the last 2 studies I showed you, which they say is a cause, and of course they leave out the oxidized LDL, and has no known offsetting favorable effects. Well, how do you know? Coconut oil has the antibacterial lauric acid as well as anti-inflammatory botanicals. We advise against the use of coconut oil. Now notice what they say there. We advise against the use of coconut oil. Nowhere in this less than 1 column section from the American Heart Association do they remotely say anything like this. Very, very different. So we can conclude without question that this information from USA Today and elsewhere is absolutely coconut oil fake news. You want to learn more about cholesterol, you can check out my 2 videos about the big fat myth about cholesterol. And I'm not saying that cholesterol is not a problem, but it's a problem in the context of the overall diet, which is usually rich in sugar, flour, and refined oils, wherein the human body makes excess cholesterol and excess lipids otherwise, especially triglycerides. And so we can see that the same scare about cholesterol is just merely a continuation of the food propaganda that has been going on for over 100 years. So if you like this video, you should share it, post it on your website, send it out to friends, subscribe to the DeFlame Nutrition YouTube channel, go in and like the DeFlame Nutrition Facebook page, because people who have been freaked out by this need to know the degree to which it is pure propaganda.